The encounter at Crestwood Bank. Michael Kingston adjusted his tie as he stepped into the polished entrance of Crestwood Bank in downtown Denver. The morning sun reflected off the bank's large glass doors, casting geometric patterns on the marble floor inside. Michael's leather briefcase hung at his side, a testament to years of meticulous care. As the CEO of Kingston Enterprises, a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, he was accustomed to conducting business with poise and professionalism. This visit to Crestwood Bank was intended to be a quick stop, just a deposit of funds into the company account before heading back to his office for a meeting with his executive team. As Michael approached the counter, he noticed the line was fairly short, a rare occurrence at such a busy branch. A young teller named Rachel stood behind the counter, her blonde hair pinned neatly back and her uniform crisp. Her expression seemed neutral at first glance, but her posture gave away a faint air of impatience. She tapped her polished nails against the counter while glancing at the clock on the wall. "Good morning," Michael greeted her with a polite smile, sliding a check and a stack of deposit slips across the counter. "I'd like to deposit this into my business account." Rachel glanced down at the check, her eyes narrowing slightly as she read the details. It was a substantial amount, nearly $250,000, and issued from Kingston Enterprises. Her eyes flicked back to Michael, and something in her demeanor shifted. She seemed to straighten, her professional neutrality replaced by a guarded skepticism. "This line is for business clients only," she said, her tone cool. Her fingers tapped once more on the counter. Michael's smile didn't waver. "I am in the right place. This is a deposit for my business account." Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll need to see some identification." Michael, ever composed, nodded and reached into his jacket pocket. He handed her his driver's license and his company ID badge. Rachel picked up the IDs and studied them for what felt like an unnecessarily long time. Her brow furrowed slightly as she examined the information. "Is this your ID?" she asked, flipping the card over as though expecting to find hidden discrepancies. "Yes," Michael replied, his voice steady. "It's my personal identification, and it matches the account." Rachel hesitated before setting the IDs aside and picking up the check again. Her fingers traced over the embossed logo of Kingston Enterprises, her skepticism palpable. "And where did you get this check?" she asked, her tone laced with doubt. Michael tilted his head slightly, his patience wearing thin. "I wrote it," he said, his voice firm but polite. "It's from my company's account." Rachel's expression didn't soften. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing further. "And what exactly is your role at this company?" she asked, her voice now tinged with incredulity. "I'm the CEO," Michael replied simply, resisting the urge to let frustration creep into his tone. He had been in countless professional settings, but this level of scrutiny over a routine transaction felt both unusual and unnecessary. Rachel's skepticism turned into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. Without another word, she pressed a button beneath the counter. A soft buzz filled the air, and Michael realized she had summoned someone, security, perhaps. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with a hint of irritation. Rachel folded her arms and leaned back slightly. "I'm just doing my job," she said defensively. "This check doesn't look right, and your story doesn't add up. I'll need another form of identification, a passport, maybe." Michael stared at her, incredulous. "A passport? Who carries a passport to the bank?" Rachel shrugged, her expression indifferent. "I do when I travel." Before Michael could respond, a tall security guard appeared, his imposing figure filling the doorway to the side of the counter. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Rachel and Michael. "Is there an issue?" the guard asked, his tone measured but firm. Rachel turned toward him, her smirk returning. "Yes," she said, gesturing toward Michael. "I suspect fraud. He handed me a check and ID that don't seem to match his story." The guard's eyes shifted to Michael, studying him with an unreadable expression. Michael met his gaze, his posture calm but unyielding. "There's no fraud," Michael said evenly. "I'm here to deposit a check from my company's account. Everything I've provided is legitimate." The guard glanced back at Rachel, then at the check she held. He seemed unsure how to proceed, his stance shifting slightly. "Do you want me to call the police?" he asked, his tone low. Rachel waved a hand dismissively. "Not yet. Let's confirm the check first. It's from a company called Kingston Enterprises. Apparently, he's the CEO." Michael took a deep breath, his patience stretched thin. "You could save us all some time by calling the number on the check," he said, his voice measured. "They'll confirm everything." Rachel ignored his suggestion and pulled a second monitor closer, typing the check details into the system. Her fingers moved briskly across the keyboard, but her glances toward Michael were anything but neutral. "Do you even have another form of ID? A business card? Anything that proves who you are?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out a business card. It was embossed with the Kingston Enterprises logo and his name in bold letters. He slid it across the counter, but Rachel barely glanced at it before setting it aside. The tension in the air was palpable now. Michael could feel the weight of several pairs of eyes from other customers in the bank. Some looked curious, others uneasy. He could hear whispers, the low hum of conversation laced with speculation. The security guard shifted his weight, his stance now more cautious. "Ma'am, if the ID matches the account, maybe we should." Rachel cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Let me do my job," she snapped, her tone sharp. Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had dealt with prejudice and skepticism before, but this experience felt particularly egregious. The assumptions, the doubt, the outright dismissal of his credibility, it was all too familiar. As Rachel continued typing, Michael glanced at the clock on the wall. He had a meeting in less than an hour, and this unnecessary delay was threatening to derail his carefully planned day. He considered leaving, but a part of him refused to let this moment pass without addressing the underlying issue. After what felt like an eternity, Rachel finally set the check down and looked up at Michael. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no apology in her eyes. "We'll have to hold the deposit for further verification," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Michael straightened, his patience finally snapping. "You've seen my ID, my business card, and the check details. I've offered to call my office to verify everything. What more do you need?" Rachel shrugged. "It's protocol," she said simply. Michael stared at her, his frustration mounting. He knew this wasn't about protocol, it was about perception. And he was determined to confront it head-on. The turning point. Michael exhaled slowly, his frustration threatening to spill over. His years in leadership had taught him how to remain composed under pressure, but this situation tested every ounce of that restraint. The implicit bias in Rachel's tone and demeanor was unmistakable. Still, Michael knew that losing his temper would only confirm her baseless suspicions. Instead, he squared his shoulders, deciding it was time to take control of the situation. "Protocol, you say?" Michael asked, his voice calm but steely. "Then let's ensure this protocol applies equally to all your clients, not just me." Rachel arched an eyebrow, momentarily caught off guard by the firmness in his tone. The security guard shifted awkwardly beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the tension brewing in the room. Several customers in the bank had paused their own transactions to watch the scene unfold, their hushed murmurs filling the otherwise quiet space. "I'd like to speak with your branch manager," Michael continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If there's a question about my identity or the legitimacy of this check, I'm certain they'll have the authority to resolve it." Rachel hesitated, her confidence faltering for a brief moment. She hadn't anticipated Michael's assertiveness, nor the growing attention from the other customers. But instead of conceding, she straightened her posture and gave a curt nod. "Fine," she said, pressing another button beneath the counter. "I'll call the manager." Moments later, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit emerged from a door near the back of the bank. His name tag read Elliot Parker, branch manager. His stride was brisk, his expression neutral but curious as he approached the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Kingston," Elliot greeted, extending a hand toward Michael. "I'm Elliot Parker, the branch manager. Is there a problem here?" Michael shook his hand firmly. "Good morning, Mr. Parker. I hope there isn't a problem, but your teller seems to believe otherwise. I came here to deposit a check into my business account, provided all the necessary identification, and even offered to verify the details with my office. Despite this, I've been treated with suspicion and now told the deposit will be held without justification." Elliot's brows furrowed as he turned toward Rachel, who was already explaining herself. "The check looked suspicious," she said defensively. "And his story didn't match up at first." Elliot raised a hand, signaling her to stop. "Did you verify the check's details with our system?" he asked. Rachel nodded. "Yes, but—" "And did the details match?" he interrupted. "They matched," she admitted reluctantly, "but I still thought it was worth holding for further verification. It's a large sum, and you can never be too careful." Elliot's gaze hardened. "Rachel, our job is to serve our clients, not make them feel unwelcome or untrusted. If the check details match and Mr. Kingston has provided valid identification, there's no reason to delay this transaction." Michael watched as Rachel's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She muttered something under her breath and turned back to her computer, her movements stiff and mechanical. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Kingston," Elliot said, turning back to Michael. "I assure you this isn't representative of our usual service. Let me personally oversee this transaction to ensure it's processed promptly." Michael nodded, appreciating the manager's professionalism. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I'd also like to suggest some training for your staff on how to handle situations like this in the future. Implicit bias can damage more than just a customer's experience, it can harm the reputation of your entire institution." Elliot's expression tightened, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "You're absolutely right, and I'll make sure this is addressed immediately. We value all of our clients, and I regret that your visit didn't reflect that." As Elliot began processing the deposit, Michael noticed Rachel stealing glances at him, her expression a mix of irritation and unease. She seemed to realize she had miscalculated, but her pride wouldn't allow her to admit it. Meanwhile, the security guard had quietly stepped back to his post, clearly relieved that the situation was de-escalating. The transaction was completed swiftly under Elliot's supervision, and Michael finally felt a sense of closure. As he prepared to leave, Elliot handed him a card. "If you ever encounter any issues in the future, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. I want to ensure your experience with Crestwood Bank is always exceptional." Michael accepted the card with a nod. "I appreciate that, Mr. Parker. Thank you for stepping in." He turned to leave, but before he could take more than a few steps, a voice called out from behind him. "Wait." It was Rachel. Michael paused, turning back slowly. Rachel stood there, her hands gripping the counter tightly, her expression strained. It was clear she was struggling with what to say. I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have made assumptions. I was just being cautious." Michael regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Caution is understandable. Disrespect is not. I hope you'll reflect on the difference." Rachel's face flushed again, and she nodded mutely. Michael turned and walked out of the bank, his briefcase swinging lightly at his side. The cool air outside felt refreshing, a stark contrast to the stifling tension he had just left behind. Later that evening, Michael sat in his office, replaying the events of the day in his mind. It wasn't the first time he had faced such treatment, but it never got easier. As a successful black entrepreneur, he was no stranger to stereotypes and prejudice. Yet, each encounter reminded him of the importance of using his platform to challenge those biases. He opened his laptop and began drafting an email. It wasn't just to Crestwood Bank but to his team at Kingston Enterprises as well. He wanted to ensure that every employee, partner, and client knew his stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion. He knew that change didn't happen overnight, but it started with conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. As he typed, a notification popped up on his screen. It was a message from a colleague who had heard about the incident at the bank. The message was brief but supportive. "Proud of how you handled yourself today. You're making a difference." Michael smiled faintly. He knew the road ahead was long, but moments like these reminded him why it was worth it. The ripple effect. The next day, Michael Jones sat at his expansive mahogany desk, the skyline of Denver stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. The morning sun cast a warm glow across the room, but Michael's mind was clouded by the previous day's events at Crestwood Bank. Though he'd left the situation resolved, the lingering sting of Rachel's assumptions gnawed at him. He had seen progress in his career and in society, but moments like that reminded him just how far there was still to go. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes landing on the framed photos lining his desk. One picture, in particular, caught his attention, a candid snapshot of him with his parents at the grand opening of Apex Capital. His father, a retired school principal, had always been his moral compass, instilling in him the importance of integrity and perseverance. His mother, a community activist, had taught him the power of standing up against injustice, not with anger, but with purpose. He could almost hear her voice in his head now. "Every challenge is an opportunity to teach and lead, Michael. Don't waste it." With that thought, Michael turned to his laptop and opened a blank document. He began typing furiously, his words fueled by determination. By mid-morning, Michael had crafted a powerful email addressed to the senior leadership at Crestwood Bank. It wasn't a letter of complaint, it was a call to action. He detailed his experience at the bank, not as an isolated incident, but as a symptom of a larger issue, implicit bias and the lack of adequate training to address it. He outlined actionable steps, such as mandatory diversity and inclusion workshops, as well as programs to foster a more inclusive workplace culture. Michael reread the email twice before hitting send. He didn't want his words to come across as accusatory but as constructive feedback from someone who believed in change. With the email sent, he took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Now, it was in their hands. Meanwhile, across town at Crestwood Bank, Rachel sat at her station, her mind replaying the encounter with Michael. The branch was quieter than usual, giving her too much time to think. She knew she had made a mistake, a glaring one, and the memory of Michael's calm but firm words stung more than she wanted to admit. Rachel had always prided herself on being diligent at her job, but yesterday, her diligence had crossed into prejudice. She had assumed the worst about Michael not because of the check or the ID but because of her own unconscious biases. It was an uncomfortable realization, and one she wasn't sure how to process. When Elliot Parker, the branch manager, approached her desk, Rachel braced herself for another reprimand. But instead of scolding her, Elliot placed a printed email on her desk. "Read this," he said simply before walking away. Rachel hesitated, then picked up the document. It was Michael's email. As she read his words, a wave of shame and humility washed over her. Michael hadn't just called out her behavior, he had laid out a path forward, a way for her and the bank to do better. His words weren't angry but thoughtful, and they carried a weight that Rachel couldn't ignore. By the time she finished reading, Rachel knew she couldn't let this moment pass without taking responsibility. She needed to do more than just apologize, she needed to change. That afternoon, Elliot called an emergency staff meeting. The employees gathered in the conference room, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. At the front of the room, Elliot held up Michael's email. "This," he began, "is one of the most important emails I've received in my career." He went on to read excerpts from Michael's message, emphasizing the need for change within their branch. When he finished, the room was silent. "Starting next week," Elliot continued, "we'll be implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff. But I don't want this to be just another box we check. I want each of you to reflect on how we can create a better experience for all of our clients. Our goal isn't just to serve, it's to respect, understand, and value every person who walks through our doors." The employees nodded, some more enthusiastically than others. Rachel, sitting near the back, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the fresh start she needed, not just for her career but for her own personal growth. While the ripple effects of Michael's actions began to take shape at Crestwood Bank, Michael himself was unaware of the changes unfolding. His focus had shifted back to his work at Apex Capital, where a busy day of meetings and strategy sessions awaited him. But even as he discussed quarterly projections and new partnerships, his thoughts occasionally drifted back to the bank. It wasn't until late that evening, as Michael was preparing to leave his office, that he received a phone call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it but decided to pick up at the last moment. "Hello. Mr. Jones, this is Elliot Parker from Crestwood Bank," came the voice on the other end. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Michael glanced at his watch. It was after 7 p.m., but he wasn't in a rush. "Not at all, Mr. Parker. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you personally for the email you sent this morning," Elliot said. "It was both insightful and necessary. I've already shared it with our team, and we're taking immediate steps to address the issues you raised." Michael smiled faintly. "I'm glad to hear that. My intention wasn't to criticize but to encourage growth. I believe we all have room to do better." "And we will," Elliot assured him. "In fact, I'd like to invite you to speak at one of our upcoming training sessions, if you're interested. I think your perspective could be invaluable to our team." The offer caught Michael off guard. He hadn't expected this level of engagement, but the idea intrigued him. "I'd be happy to consider it," he said. "Send me the details, and we'll see what we can arrange." They exchanged a few more pleasantries before ending the call. As Michael hung up, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His experience at the bank had been frustrating, but it had also opened a door for meaningful change. And that, he realized, was worth far more than any deposit. Building bridges. The following week, Michael Jones found himself back at Crestwood Bank. This time, though, he wasn't there to deposit a check or address a personal grievance. Instead, he was stepping into a conference room at the invitation of Elliot Parker, the branch manager, to speak to the bank staff about his experience and the broader implications of bias in professional environments. Michael had spent days preparing for this. It wasn't just about recounting what had happened to him, it was about making the employees see how moments like these could ripple outward, affecting not only their customers but the community as a whole. He wanted to show them how small changes in attitude and perspective could foster a culture of respect and inclusion. The conference room was quiet as Michael walked in. The bank staff, including tellers, managers, and back-office personnel, sat around a long rectangular table. Rachel was among them, her posture stiff and her eyes fixed on the notepad in front of her. She hadn't been able to sleep much since the day of their encounter, and now, seeing Michael again, her stomach churned with a mix of guilt and nervousness. Elliot stood at the head of the table, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we've started implementing changes in response to recent events, and today, we're fortunate to have Mr. Michael Jones, CEO of Apex Capital, join us to share his perspective. Let's give him a warm welcome." Polite applause followed, though some claps were slower and less enthusiastic than others. Michael nodded his thanks, his calm demeanor commanding the room's attention. "Thank you, Elliot, and thank you all for allowing me this opportunity," Michael began. I want to start by saying that my intention here isn't to point fingers or dwell on the past. Instead, I want us to explore how we can all learn from moments of misunderstanding and turn them into opportunities for growth. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The truth is, what happened to me at this bank isn't unique. It's part of a larger pattern that many people face every day: assumptions made based on appearances, quick judgments that overlook the full story, and biases that we often don't even realize we carry. But here's the thing, acknowledging these biases doesn't make us bad people. Ignoring them does. Michael shared a personal story from his early career, his first time walking into a boardroom as a young black entrepreneur. He described the skeptical looks he received, the whispered doubts about his capabilities, and the obstacles he had to overcome just to be taken seriously. "I'm not sharing this for sympathy," Michael clarified. "I'm sharing it because I've learned that the way to combat these biases isn't through anger, but through excellence and persistence. And most importantly, by opening up conversations like the one we're having today." As Michael spoke, the staff began to lean in, their initial reservations giving way to genuine interest. Even Rachel found herself captivated by his words, though they stung with the truth of her own actions. She couldn't deny that she had made the very kind of assumptions Michael was talking about. After Michael's speech, Elliot opened the floor for questions. A young teller named Jessica raised her hand first. "Mr. Jones, how do you stay so composed in situations like the one you faced here? I don't think I could have handled it as gracefully as you did." Michael smiled warmly. "It's not always easy, Jessica. There were times in my life when I wanted to lash out, to meet hostility with hostility. But I realized early on that anger only fuels the cycle. The best way to break it is to stay calm, state your case clearly, and let your actions speak for themselves." Another hand shot up, this time, it was Rachel. She hesitated for a moment, then stood up, her voice shaky but determined. "Mr. Jones, I owe you an apology. The way I treated you was wrong, and I see that now. I made assumptions that had no basis, and I'm truly sorry for the way I made you feel." The room went silent, all eyes on Michael. He nodded, appreciating her courage to speak up. "Thank you, Rachel. Apologizing takes courage, and I respect you for it. But what's more important is what you do moving forward. This isn't about one moment or one mistake, it's about how we grow from it." The session concluded with a round of applause, this time more heartfelt. As the staff filed out, many stopped to thank Michael personally. Rachel lingered at the back of the room, her face flushed. When the others had left, she approached Michael, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Mr. Jones," she began, "I know an apology isn't enough, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better. Not just at work, but in how I see and treat people." Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "That's all anyone can ask for, Rachel. Change doesn't happen overnight, but the fact that you're willing to take that first step means a lot." Later that evening, Michael received an email from Elliot, thanking him once again for his time and insight. Attached to the email was a proposal for a long-term partnership between Apex Capital and Crestwood Bank, focusing on community outreach and financial literacy programs for underprivileged areas. Michael couldn't help but smile. What had started as a frustrating encounter was now evolving into something much bigger, a chance to create lasting change. As Michael closed his laptop and prepared to leave his office, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just a victory for him, it was a victory for understanding, growth, and the possibility of a better future. A community united. A month had passed since Michael Jones' transformative visit to Crestwood Bank, and the ripple effects of that day were already visible in the community. What began as an isolated incident of bias had blossomed into a movement that was reshaping relationships, not just within the bank, but throughout the surrounding neighborhoods. Michael's partnership with Crestwood Bank had been formalized, and together, they launched a program called Bridges Beyond Bias. It was an initiative designed to address unconscious prejudices, promote financial literacy, and foster opportunities for small businesses in underserved areas. The program's tagline, "See the potential, not the preconception," quickly became a rallying cry across Denver. The grand opening. The first major event under the program was a community financial literacy workshop, held in a large event hall in one of Denver's historically underserved neighborhoods. The event drew a crowd far larger than anyone had anticipated. People of all ages and backgrounds filled the room, eager to learn about budgeting, investment opportunities, and small business funding. Michael stood at the entrance, greeting attendees with a warm smile and a handshake. Among them were single mothers trying to save for their children's education, young entrepreneurs dreaming of opening their own businesses, and retirees looking to manage their savings. Inside, booths lined the walls, manned by bank staff and volunteers from Apex Capital. Each booth catered to a specific need: setting up business accounts, applying for microloans, understanding credit scores, and more. Workshops were scheduled throughout the day, and each session was packed with eager participants. Rachel, the teller who had initially wronged Michael, was among the volunteers. She had requested to join the program after the conference, seeing it as an opportunity to make amends and grow personally. As she worked alongside Michael and other volunteers, her confidence grew. For the first time, she felt like she was truly making a difference. A young dreamer's encounter. Midway through the event, a young man named Jamal approached Michael. He was in his early 20s, with a worn notebook tucked under his arm and a mixture of hope and hesitation in his eyes. "Mr. Jones," Jamal began nervously, "I've read about you in Apex Capital. I have an idea for a business, but I don't know where to start. My family doesn't have much, and I've never thought I'd get the chance to talk to someone like you." Michael smiled warmly and gestured for Jamal to sit with him at a nearby table. "Let's hear your idea," he said. Jamal opened his notebook, revealing detailed sketches and notes for a mobile app designed to connect local businesses with freelance workers. As he spoke, his passion for the project shone through, but it was clear he lacked the resources and guidance to bring his vision to life. Michael listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering advice. By the end of their conversation, he handed Jamal a business card. "Come by my office next week," he said. "We'll discuss how to get this off the ground." Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes as he shook Michael's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "You have no idea what this means to me." Breaking barriers. As the day progressed, Michael noticed something remarkable: people who might never have crossed paths were now engaging with one another. Bank employees chatted with local residents, sharing tips and offering guidance without the usual barriers of formality or judgment. Rachel, in particular, found herself connecting with attendees in ways she hadn't expected. At one point, she helped an older woman named Maria navigate the process of opening a savings account for her grandchildren. Maria spoke limited English, but Rachel patiently guided her, using a translation app to ensure nothing was lost in communication. Afterward, Maria clasped Rachel's hands and said, "Thank you. You made this so easy for me." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. For the first time, she understood the power of empathy and the importance of treating every customer with dignity. The keynote. The highlight of the event was Michael's keynote speech. As he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He looked out at the diverse crowd before him and felt a profound sense of responsibility. "I stand here today," Michael began, "not as a CEO, but as a member of this community. A community that, like so many others, is stronger when we come together, listen to one another, and build bridges instead of walls." He spoke about the lessons he had learned throughout his life and career, the importance of perseverance, the value of mentorship, and the need to challenge biases both within ourselves and in the systems we navigate. "We all have the power to make a difference," he said. "Whether it's by mentoring a young entrepreneur, treating every customer with respect, or simply taking the time to understand someone else's story. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with each of us." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Michael's words had resonated deeply, leaving an indelible mark on everyone in the room. A new chapter for Rachel. As the event wound down, Rachel approached Michael, her expression a mixture of gratitude and determination. "Mr. Jones," she said, "I wanted to thank you again, for everything. This program, this day, it's changed me. I used to see my job as just that, a job. But now I realize it's so much more. It's a chance to make a real impact." Michael smiled. "I'm glad to hear that, Rachel. Remember, growth isn't about perfection, it's about progress. And you're making it." Rachel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. The ripple effect. By the end of the day, it was clear that the Bridges Beyond Bias program was more than just an initiative, it was a catalyst for change. The event had not only educated attendees but had also fostered connections and inspired hope. Michael left the event with a full heart, knowing this was just the beginning. He envisioned a future where programs like this one would become the norm, breaking down barriers and empowering communities across the country. As he drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from Jamal, "Thank you again for believing in me. I won't let you down." Michael smiled. It was moments like this that reminded him why he had chosen this path, to use his success not just for personal gain, but to uplift others and create a world where everyone, regardless of background, had the chance to thrive. From vision to legacy. The months following the launch of Bridges Beyond Bias brought an unprecedented transformation not only to Crestwood Bank but also to the broader Denver community. Michael Jones had set out with the goal of sparking a movement, but the impact exceeded even his lofty expectations. What had begun as a single effort to address bias and inequality had now become a blueprint for systemic change across the financial and corporate landscape. The rise of Apex Capital Outreach. At Apex Capital's headquarters, Michael and his team had dedicated an entire floor to what they now called the Outreach and Innovation Hub. This division was tasked with driving initiatives aimed at empowering underrepresented entrepreneurs, promoting diversity in leadership, and fostering equitable access to financial resources. Among the program's first beneficiaries was Jamal, the young man Michael had met at the financial literacy workshop. With the mentorship provided by Apex Capital, Jamal had turned his app idea into a functional prototype. Within months, his app, named Link Local, had secured beta users and attracted interest from venture capital firms. At a launch event held at Apex Capital, Jamal stood on stage, overwhelmed with gratitude, as he shared his story. "This wouldn't have been possible without the mentorship and resources I received," Jamal said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Michael Jones didn't just believe in my idea, he believed in me. And that belief changed my life." The crowd erupted in applause as Michael, standing in the audience, gave a proud nod. Watching Jamal succeed was a reminder of why this work mattered so deeply. Crestwood Bank's transformation. Crestwood Bank had undergone a metamorphosis of its own. Following Michael's partnership, the bank committed to making inclusivity a cornerstone of its operations. Rachel, once at the center of the controversy, had become a key advocate for change within the organization. She spearheaded the development of a new customer service training program, focusing on empathy, cultural competency, and unconscious bias. As part of this initiative, bank employees participated in workshops that challenged them to reflect on their assumptions and biases. Role-playing scenarios helped them learn how to approach customers with respect and openness, regardless of their appearance or background. The program had a profound impact on Rachel personally. She became known for her ability to connect with customers, no matter their story. Her transformation inspired her colleagues, and she was soon promoted to a leadership position within the bank. At a company-wide meeting, Rachel addressed her peers. "I've learned that growth isn't always comfortable," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's about looking in the mirror, acknowledging your flaws, and choosing to do better every single day. And when you do that, you don't just change yourself, you change the world around you. Michael, who had been invited to the meeting as a guest speaker, watched Rachel with a mix of pride and admiration. Her journey from skepticism to leadership symbolized the very essence of bridges beyond bias. A personal revelation. Despite his busy schedule, Michael had made it a point to regularly visit the communities impacted by the program. On one such visit, he stopped by a small cafe owned by a woman named Patrice. She had been one of the first business owners to receive a microloan through the program. As they sat together over coffee, Patrice shared her story. "I was ready to give up," she admitted. "I had the dream, but I didn't have the means. This program didn't just give me a loan, it gave me hope. And now, my cafe is thriving." Michael listened intently, his heart swelling with gratitude. Stories like Patrice's reminded him of his own journey, of the challenges he had faced as a young black entrepreneur trying to navigate a world that often underestimated him. Later that evening, as he reflected on his conversation with Patrice, Michael realized something profound. His legacy wouldn't be defined by the wealth he accumulated or the accolades he received. It would be defined by the lives he touched, the opportunities he created, and the barriers he helped dismantle. Expanding the vision. Encouraged by the success of Bridges Beyond Bias in Denver, Michael began working to expand the program nationwide. He partnered with banks, corporations, and non-profit organizations across the country, creating a network of allies committed to fostering inclusivity and opportunity. Each city brought its own unique challenges, but Michael approached them with the same determination and empathy that had guided him from the start. In Atlanta, the program focused on supporting minority-owned tech startups. In Detroit, it provided funding and training for manufacturing entrepreneurs. In Los Angeles, it tackled the barriers faced by immigrant business owners. Everywhere he went, Michael encountered individuals with stories of resilience and ambition. And with each new partnership, his vision of a more equitable world came closer to reality. A legacy cemented. Years later, Michael stood at the grand opening of the Jones Center for Equity and Innovation, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to advancing the principles of Bridges Beyond Bias. Located in the heart of Denver, the center housed classrooms, co-working spaces, and mentorship hubs, all designed to empower the next generation of leaders. Among the program's first beneficiaries was Jamal, the young man Michael had met at the financial literacy workshop. With the mentorship provided by Apex Capital, Jamal had turned his app idea into a functional prototype. Within months, his app, named Link Local, had secured beta users and attracted interest from venture capital firms. At a launch event held at Apex Capital, Jamal stood on stage, overwhelmed with gratitude, as he shared his story. "This wouldn't have been possible without the mentorship and resources I received," Jamal said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Michael Jones didn't just believe in my idea, he believed in me. And that belief changed my life." The crowd erupted in applause as Michael, standing in the audience, gave a proud nod. Watching Jamal succeed was a reminder of why this work mattered so deeply. Crestwood Bank's transformation. Crestwood Bank had undergone a metamorphosis of its own. Following Michael's partnership, the bank committed to making inclusivity a cornerstone of its operations. Rachel, once at the center of the controversy, had become a key advocate for change within the organization. She spearheaded the development of a new customer service training program, focusing on empathy, cultural competency, and unconscious bias. As part of this initiative, bank employees participated in workshops that challenged them to reflect on their assumptions and biases. Role-playing scenarios helped them learn how to approach customers with respect and openness, regardless of their appearance or background. The program had a profound impact on Rachel personally. She became known for her ability to connect with customers, no matter their story. Her transformation inspired her colleagues, and she was soon promoted to a leadership position within the bank. At a company-wide meeting, Rachel addressed her peers. "I've learned that growth isn't always comfortable," she said, her voice steady but emotional. It's about looking in the mirror, acknowledging your flaws, and choosing to do better every single day. And when you do that, you don't just change yourself, you change the world around you. Michael, who had been invited to the meeting as a guest speaker, watched Rachel with a mix of pride and admiration. Her journey from skepticism to leadership symbolized the very essence of bridges beyond bias. A personal revelation. Despite his busy schedule, Michael had made it a point to regularly visit the communities impacted by the program. On one such visit, he stopped by a small cafe owned by a woman named Patrice. She had been one of the first business owners to receive a microloan through the program. As they sat together over coffee, Patrice shared her story. "I was ready to give up," she admitted. "I had the dream, but I didn't have the means. This program didn't just give me a loan, it gave me hope. And now, my cafe is thriving." Michael listened intently, his heart swelling with gratitude. Stories like Patrice's reminded him of his own journey, of the challenges he had faced as a young black entrepreneur trying to navigate a world that often underestimated him. Later that evening, as he reflected on his conversation with Patrice, Michael realized something profound. His legacy wouldn't be defined by the wealth he accumulated or the accolades he received. It would be defined by the lives he touched, the opportunities he created, and the barriers he helped dismantle. Expanding the vision. Encouraged by the success of Bridges Beyond Bias in Denver, Michael began working to expand the program nationwide. He partnered with banks, corporations, and non-profit organizations across the country, creating a network of allies committed to fostering inclusivity and opportunity. Each city brought its own unique challenges, but Michael approached them with the same determination and empathy that had guided him from the start. In Atlanta, the program focused on supporting minority-owned tech startups. In Detroit, it provided funding and training for manufacturing entrepreneurs. In Los Angeles, it tackled the barriers faced by immigrant business owners. Everywhere he went, Michael encountered individuals with stories of resilience and ambition. And with each new partnership, his vision of a more equitable world came closer to reality. A legacy cemented. Years later, Michael stood at the grand opening of the Jones Center for Equity and Innovation, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to advancing the principles of Bridges Beyond Bias. Located in the heart of Denver, the center housed classrooms, co-working spaces, and mentorship hubs, all designed to empower the next generation of leaders. The event was attended by hundreds, including many whose lives had been transformed by Michael's work. Jamal, now a successful entrepreneur, gave a heartfelt speech about the impact Michael had on his life. Rachel, now a regional manager at Crestwood Bank, spoke about the ripple effects of the program within the banking industry. As Michael took the stage, he looked out at the sea of faces, each one a testament to the power of belief, perseverance, and compassion. "I didn't get here alone," Michael began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And neither did any of us. We're here because someone believed in us, invested in us, and gave us a chance. My hope is that this center will be a beacon for those who dream big but feel unseen. Because when we lift each other up, there's no limit to what we can achieve." The audience rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the hall. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Michael, but for everyone who had been part of the journey. Epilogue, passing the torch. Years later, as Michael prepared to step back from his day-to-day responsibilities at Apex Capital, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had built a thriving company, transformed communities, and inspired countless individuals to chase their dreams. But he knew his work wasn't done. In his final act as CEO, Michael established a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs from marginalized backgrounds, ensuring that the next generation would have the tools they needed to succeed. And as he watched the first group of scholarship recipients step onto the stage at the inaugural award ceremony, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. His legacy wasn't just about what he had accomplished, it was about what he had empowered others to achieve. The future, he realized, was in good hands.